In mid-August, Cameron went online to settle his outstanding debt to Currys before what he thought was the end of the interest-free period, only to find that the cost of his TV had suddenly gone up from £1,269 to £1,439.
So I thought, well, that's not how much I bought the TV for. And I thought, OK, they've actually charged me something here.
Cameron got in touch with Currys to find out what was going on.
They sent me an email replying back to my query regarding this extra charge. They said the free period expired on the 3rd of August. And I thought, hang on a minute. I've specifically asked them the question, you know, when do I need to make the payment to avoid any charges, avoid any interest? And they clearly stated to me the 27th of August. So, you know, it's completely the wrong information given to me upon sale.
As Currys insisted that he hadn't paid his loan off within the interest-free period, Cameron had been charged interest on the full purchase price, an additional £170. Cameron put in a complaint, but says he got nowhere. And with interest mounting, he too decided the best thing to do was to make the £1,439 payment in full.
So I settled the balance, and it has spoilt the enjoyment, you know. I've technically been sort of ripped off.
Martyn James from the consumer website Resolver agrees that buy now, pay later schemes can be very misleading for customers and could lead to you sleepwalking your way into debt.
There's a really clever psychology about buy now, pay later credit. It works on the basis that we all think that we're the kind of people that will pay off a deal in advance. But the fact of the matter is, it's very difficult to do that, and the vast majority of us end up paying huge rates of interest. And when I say huge, we can be looking at 40% and above.
For Melanie, that only adds to her feeling she's been treated unfairly.
A responsible lender wouldn't charge you interest on something that you've paid. Happy to pay interest. I expected taking an interest payment for what the balance was, but not an amount that I'd already paid to them. It just seems wrong.
Well, a very interesting couple of cases there. Now, the companies in both those cases, Argos for Melanie and Currys PC World for Cameron, have come back to us with similar points. They say that the terms of their buy now, pay later deals included deferred interest charges, and crucially, the dates for repayments were made very clear when the agreements were taken out. They also say that information would have been on the regular statements that both of them would have received after taking out the deal.
Indeed, Argos added that it had also sent Melanie deferred interest warning letters, both through the post and via text messages. It said, unlike some lenders, if a customer does pay off part of the amount they owe during the interest-free period, then their interest payments would be adjusted automatically. But it said in Melanie's case, the amount that she did pay came so late in her agreement that it didn't actually make much of an impact on the interest that was due, which is why, to her, it did seem like she was being paid interest on the whole original purchase price. It is all complicated, isn't it?
It is very complicated. And in Cameron's case, Currys PC World stressed that the terms of its deals meet all legal, regulatory and industry requirements. However, we do have some good news. We love good news in this programme. It said that having reviewed his case, it would refund him £170 interest payment and give him £100 on top as a goodwill gesture, which I think is a very encouraging result for him. It's good.
Well, the body that regulates this kind of thing, the Financial Conduct Authority, is making some big changes to stop more people ending up like Melanie and Cameron. And joining me now from the FCA to discuss that is Christopher Woolard. Christopher, we saw in our report two very unhappy people who obviously feel that, let's put it this way, they were bamboozled by the terms and conditions and ended up having to pay far more than they thought they should. How has this been allowed to happen?
So the current rules that have been in place for many years around this market are something that we've looked at. The problems that are identified in the piece you've just showed are exactly the ones that we've found. So in other words, some of the terms and conditions are not clear enough for customers in the first place, but then also there's a big issue around backdated interest in the buy now, pay later market.
But I mean, you've just said yourself this has been going on for years. Why haven't you taken any action before now?
So many of the rules we're talking about have been in law for around 20 or even 30 years. We took over responsibility for consumer credit around 5 years ago. We've been looking at where the biggest harms are in the market, so not just things like buy now, pay later, but also things like payday lending, credit cards, overdrafts. So we're working through a campaign of how to deal with those high-cost credit problems.
I mean, Martyn, in our report, more or less alluded to lambs being led to the slaughter. Is that the way you see it?
So we don't see it quite that way. I mean, this is big business. Around 3 million people a year use buy now, pay later products. There's about £1 billion being lent in credit every year. Now, a lot of people do pay off within the interest-free periods, but there are two important changes we think need to be made to the market.
What are those changes?
So the changes are, first of all, making those terms and conditions much, much clearer when you sign up. So the information you get in store needs to change, and indeed we've changed the rules on that from September. The other big one, though, is this issue of big backdated interest. It's really, really important. If you pay off money during the period where you've got one of these agreements, we believe you shouldn't be paying interest on that, and that practice will be banned from the 12th of November.
I mean, do you think it ought to actually say, if you go one day over, you will end up paying interest? In other words, make it as easy for people to understand as that.
Yeah, absolutely. So what we've put in place is a series of changes to the disclosures that people get when they take out these kinds of deals. It should be much clearer to people that they could be paying interest if they go beyond the interest-free period.
And briefly, if people do still feel that they're not getting a fair deal, what can they do? So
the first thing to do is to complain to the person who's lent the money to you. So that's either the retailer or the agent who's acting for the retailer. If you're still not satisfied with the reply you get, you can go to the Financial Ombudsman.
Christopher, thank you very much indeed for that.
Thank you.
Well, now, quite a few of you are already contacting us about that particular story, but I also have to tell you that we're absolutely inundated with comments after our item yesterday on recycling and those big differences between what you can and can't recycle, depending on exactly where you live.
So thanks to everybody who's been in touch, with some of you taking issue with some of the points that were made by the man from the Local Government Association, especially when Julia asked him whether or not the rest of the UK should be following the Welsh example and standardising their collections.
The total population of Wales, less than half the population of London. We're talking about...
What's that got to do with it?
Well, because actually you're talking about a very small population.
Well, I'm afraid not all of you agreed with that. Barbara Miller's comments were typical. She says she works as a carer and has to dispose of rubbish right across different boroughs, each with different rules. She told us that getting it right is a bit of a nightmare and it needs to be standardised.
You might expect, and indeed we also heard from people in Wales who had a rather different opinion to the ones that we were hearing in the studio. Many of them felt that things are not quite as standardised there as it might have appeared, with some areas, for instance, very happy to collect things like batteries from the curbside, while others just won't. But it still sounds an awful lot simpler than what Rachel in Manchester has to deal with. Now, she sent us her bin collection timetable. Take a look at that, to give us an idea of what she has to deal with. I want to know whether or not the council also pay for you to go and take a course in higher mathematics to be able to understand it.
If you keep the still up, if you were colourblind, how would you ever make head or tail of that particular table? That was hilarious. And lots of you were also gripped by our film on the problems that people have had trying to recover their cars after they've been stolen. For example, Maggie Rees and her son and his partner had both their cars stolen after a break-in at their house. They were recovered within 48 hours, but here's the sting. Their insurance was then cancelled immediately with no adequate explanation, and their subsequent premiums have absolutely skyrocketed, so much so, and I hate to say this, they've had to trade in one of their cars, which is rough.
Does sound tough, doesn't it? Huge thanks for all of the comments that you've sent us, and I really am sorry that we can't read all of them out, but you know, they really do help us to work out the kind of topics that we need to cover in future programmes, so please do keep them coming. But right now, Julia is over there with our experts tackling more of your problems.
Thanks, Gloria, and I'm here with David from Essex and our travel expert, Simon Calder. Now, David, I know that you're here because of the collapse of Thomas Cook. And if I've got this right, you booked a cruise, a Caribbean cruise in January with Fred Olsen, but you then discovered that your flights to get you there were with Thomas Cook. You've paid a deposit of £1,500 so far. You've heard nothing back about what's going on with the flights, and now they're after you for more money. And how do you feel about all that?
That's right. We feel quite anxious because they want the balance to be paid, £4,700 odd tomorrow. 90 days
Blimey.
before the cruise.
Yes, so that doesn't sound altogether fair, does it, Simon?
Well, no, look, let's put the point of view of many companies that had flights booked with Thomas Cook Airlines. So besides the million or so people who were directly affected being customers of Thomas Cook, you also had people like Dave and their companies desperately trying to find flights. However, we're now 3.5 weeks after the sad collapse of Thomas Cook. I, this morning, just before we went on air, had a quick look. It took me 2 minutes to find suitable flights from Gatwick out to Barbados, back from the Dominican Republic, price £500. If I can do that, then a big cruise company should be able to do that and not leave Dave in the position of having to hand over thousands of pounds and say, right, well, we're not going to tell you yet how you're getting there, but just, we'll get you there somehow. Very unsettling.
Well, I think, David, we may have a little bit of good news for you, because we have actually been in touch with Fred Olsen and they've apologised to you. I hope that's some comfort. And they say the collapse of Thomas Cook left them with challenges of securing new flights for some 14,500 customers. But the good news is they say they've now agreed terms with 2 airlines to get people to their Caribbean cruises, and it'll soon be in a position to confirm your new flights. Does that make you feel happy?
That's reassuring. Thank you very much.
But you've still got to cough up.
Unfortunately, yes. Tomorrow.
It's extremely unfortunate because Dave might find that they're actually going to put him on connecting flights, which will be really annoying. As we've said before on Rip Off Britain, if you're looking at a cruise, book late to avoid disappointment. There's
Simon,
less time for things to go wrong.
Wise words, and send us a postcard.
I will.
When you get there.
Thank you.
And now to Martyn. And Martyn, it's all about the consumer and the rights for repairs. Tell me all about that.
Well, Julia, a lot of us really care about environmental issues these days, and yet millions of us are forced to junk our fridges or washing machines because it's simply too expensive to get them repaired. Now, new EU rules are kicking in 2 years' time, 2021, that will mean you have an automatic right to repair. That means that all the components that go into these machines will have to be standardised and easily accessible, so you can get a repair done much quicker.
And will it cost you still?
Unfortunately, you're still going to have to pay for the repair itself to be done, but it's going to be a lot cheaper. Before, you couldn't even get the backs off these machines sorted very quickly at all. Now, the good news is, even though we're still waiting to see what will happen with Brexit, lots going on today, the fact of the matter is, if we're selling goods to the EU or we're buying them from the EU, these rules will still apply.
Good news, Martyn. Thanks very much. Well, in a moment, Gloria's going to have more from Simon on some of the big issues facing the travel industry, and there's plenty to choose from.